How's it going, everyone? My name is Iron Stark, and today, I boldly go where every single Elden Ring content creator has gone before, making a boss ranking. We all know that these boss rankings are incredibly subjective, a load of garbage, and vary from person to person, and when it comes down to it, they don't really mean anything real. However, why you should watch this video anyway, is I offer two gimmicks for you. First, I have played a lot of Elden Ring, specifically over 2,000 hours of it, so I have a lot of thoughts about these bosses that live rent-free in my brain. Secondly, I'm not ranking these bosses based on difficulty because that is a topic that has been beaten to death at this point. As such, I will be ranking these bosses based on how fun I feel these bosses are mechanically. I don't intend to bog down this list with the atmosphere, the story, the lore, the OST, or whatever with these bosses. So, where do I begin to form a concept for my idea of how fun an Elden Ring boss is? There are four main qualifiers that I decided to bear in mind when coming up with my personal ranking of how fun a boss is. First, moveset. Are the moves that I'm learning satisfying and enjoyable? Are they consistent to dodge, position away from, parry, block, jump evade, that sort of thing? Next, fight pacing. Is the fight paced in a way that feels engaging and makes combat flow? Is there a back and forth between the boss and player that gives a dance-like quality to the fight? Or can the fight be completely dominated by the player, or inversely, does it feel like the boss is completely controlling the tempo? Third, the arena. Does the setting of the fight enhance the combat experience and complement the size, speed, and moveset of the boss, or is it detrimental to these elements? And lastly, and most importantly for repeat runs, longevity. Is the boss still fun with repeated playthroughs and feel as fresh as the first day that you fought it? Or does the quality of the boss wane over time? These are all elements that were put into consideration while I was ranking Elden Ring's bosses, which I will reference when discussing the bosses when relevant. Next, I had to establish which Elden Ring bosses I wanted to include in this ranking. The bosses I will be including are all remembrance bosses from both Elden Ring's base game, Shadow of the Erdtree, and any bosses that are typically mandatory in order to reach a remembrance boss. For example, Draconic Tree Sentinel can be skipped to enter Leyndell, but most players aren't going to go that route. Valiant Gargoyles can also be skipped to enter Deeproot Depths, but likewise most players won't go that way. Typically, you have to fight those bosses to enter those respective areas, and then fight those remembrance bosses. Lastly, I won't be including any NPC boss fights because I believe I speak for most when I say that NPC boss fights generally suck. With all that out of the way, let's begin ranking Elden Ring bosses from least to most fun after playing for 2,000 hours. So, Metyr Mother of Fingers is the least fun boss in all of Elden Ring, and it's not even close. I would start by saying that the ambience of Metyr's boss fight is incredible, but unfortunately for her, this isn't that kind of ranking. We're talking about how fun the fight is, not for the visual art of this fight and how it speaks to me. This fight doesn't feel good in any capacity, under any circumstances, bottom line. Examining Metyr's moveset, it consists of her flailing around like a toddler, swatting her arms around with no finesse, flicking her fingers out, mashing her head into the ground. Again, is this an eldritch god or a 5-year-old? When I think of Elden Ring's combat, I think of tight, purposefully crafted combat, not this garbage. Oh, she can also summon smaller finger creepers, but that adds nothing to the fight, so she can't even get gank elements correct. Where this fight becomes even more egregious is her second phase Void Laser. The initial AoE can feel pretty bad, as it's very difficult to roll, but that's not where the Void Laser is truly bad. Unless you run Raptor of the Mist, which is a pretty niche skill, the Void Laser is guaranteed damage. Guaranteed damage in a Souls game is something that should never be praised because it takes away from intuitive design and player's skill. And while I'm not saying that every single boss fight should be able to be no damage necessarily, the existence of a guaranteed damage attack takes away from boss quality. At least she can be beaten before using the Void Laser altogether, so that's neat, I guess. Whoever made this boss needs to not be allowed to cook again. Regarding the Valiant Gargoyles, let's pretend that the whole 2 gargoyle gank hasn't been done before. This fight would still be pretty garbage. Moveset wise, they've got a pretty interesting mechanic, swapping their weapons to keep the player on their toes, but this fight has a whole lot of stink going on. They're the perfect height for some camera shenanigans to play a factor, which is never fun. Moveset wise, both of them have garbage movesets. There's no consistent tempo with either of them, either attacking too fast with hardly any tells, or attacking too slow with telegraphs that take 5 business days. The hitboxes on their flurry attacks in particular are kind of sus. Their poison mist manages to stagger you and inflict status with each tick while blending into the arena. Yes, the idea of a good move is to have a greenish mist against a cool tone background. Somewhat from clearly didn't study art design. Anyway, when this fight becomes a duo, that poison mist is spammed pretty much everywhere, and these hoppy bastards love to back and sidestep, making it feel like they spend more time prancing around the arena than they spend actually fighting you, and lastly, their weird-ass bodies have some wonky hurt boxes, leading to attacks whiffing when they shouldn't. The Guardians themselves suffer from the same Elden Ring plague that most duo fights have, where it feels like both bosses just don't know that the other one's even in there. This is less offensive than, say, the Godskin duo, because this fight starts as a one-on-one before eventually becoming a gank, but even then, most optimal builds can take down the first gargoyle before the second one is even a factor. So it kind of makes you wonder, why even have a second gargoyle for another mediocre, poorly constructed boss? The Godskin duo is certainly one of the bosses of all time, because they're more obnoxious than truly difficult or engaging. I'll try to keep this short, since putting the Godskin duo this low is as derivative as making a boss ranking. Individually, the moveset of the Godskins is mostly inoffensive, I dare say even good, with a mix of combos, gap closers, and the infamous animation reading Black Fireball that can be used to manipulate their AI a bit. And the arena fosters the idea of splitting aggro, but this fight has a lot of tedious elements that really kill the joy of it. The Noble's role is the stuff of nightmares, and one of the buggiest attacks in the entire game. Noble Presence is hot garbage that has next to no tell coming out nearly instantaneously, and it sends the player flying if it connects. The role and Noble Presence aside, the Godskins should be fine, but they're just not. The way the boss AI works for the Noble and the Apostle is that they act like the other isn't even there. Sure, the Apostle tends to hang back while the Noble presses the advance, but under the right circumstances they're both all over the player. This leads to a jumbled mess of a fight where you kind of need to pray that they play nice. This fight can be good if you single one out and defeat it to even the odds, making it a one-on-one, but good luck with that without a stance break heavy build. And sure, you could always use sleep pots to trivialize the fight and DPS them into oblivion, but what does that tell you about the fight when you're better off turning off their movesets and turning them into glorified punching bags? Jory Elder Inquisitor escapes the bottom 3 for me in terms of enjoyment, but only marginally, and I'll explain why. To begin, he is one of few Elden Ring bosses who feels like his gank elements are intentional, and I dare say, well implemented. His summons are part of Jory's kit and act as their own attack, and Joy tends to let them attack you when they're active, rather than spamming you with spells while they bully you. The summons themselves can be taken down in a hit or two, and the graveyard itself is large enough and wide enough so that there's plenty of room to maneuver against Joy and his summons, and his spells are straightforward, being able to jump over Great Golden Arc, sprint around Joy's Inquisition, and Spira offers a nice backstab opportunity that would make any Dark Souls 1 enjoyer blush with nostalgia. However, don't mistake these positives for gushing about Joy. He's a certified spell spammer, which typically devolves into one of two things: either you running around like crazy, or brutalizing him into the dirt with very little in between, which messes with the overall pacing of a fight. He does have one move that saves him from aggressive melee, which is his Radigan-esque teleport, which he frankly knows how to use a little too well. It's near instantaneous, difficult to evade, but that's not what makes it obnoxious. What makes it obnoxious is that this teleport grants Joy a golden opportunity to start spamming his summons and spells at you, which causes this fight to devolve into a chaotic brawl, where one moment you're trying to sprint around the ganks to get to Joy, getting smacked around by the big boy's tornado, or catching up to Joy only for him to teleport away and hit stun you to start the madness all over again. Seriously, I just want to have a talk with who decided that teleports in Elden Ring needed a hitbox. Estelle, a remembrance boss so unique and one of a kind that there's another one in a random cave. The Stars of Darkness one is somehow the more definitive version of this fight, but as he doesn't have a remembrance, we'll only be measuring the quality of the natural born version. Not that there's too much difference between the two of them. But yeah, this fight is a bit of a stinker once you get past the glitz and glamour of the encounter with this cosmic entity. Estelle's moveset doesn't really feel like it fits into a Souls-like game, with slow and floaty movements. Typically, what comes to mind with Souls-like bosses, people think of an aggressive, fast-paced boss fight where the player talks about this euphoric dancing rush of adrenaline. So I have to at least appreciate From for trying to do something different with Estelle's design. The sniping laser is a very cool way to start the fight, and his signature Meteorite of Estelle gives an excellent opportunity to rush down the boss while the meteors rush over your head. But that's about where the fun ends with his moveset. The rest of Estelle's moves are a game of keep away. He dashes in with Nebula, where you may or may not have a clean shot at Estelle's body. He can use Nebula as a retreat, putting distance between you and him. Estelle's various versions of Waves of Darkness all act as a back-off attack. And the teleports. You know what makes for a real engaging boss fight? A boss that chronically teleports away. The teleports wouldn't be so obnoxious if they couldn't be followed up with potentially the most infamous grab hitbox in all of Elden Ring, where Estelle decides that 60 vigor doesn't mean a damn thing with those big choppers of his. Dodging this attack is weird. Sometimes the spacing feels perfect, and the grab connects and you are reaching the "you died" screen. Other times, you think that you're going to get grabbed and it misses. It really doesn't feel like this grab is in the player's hands. And yeah, with Estelle's running away, melee builds spend more time sprinting towards him or out of the way of AoEs, and his moveset feels like it's way more flair than mechanically tight. God, do I want to like the Red Wolf of Radigan, but just can't. Conceptually, the idea of a creature boss with blazing fast melee, switching between savage bites and magical sword slashes and ranged spells, is just awesome. It allows for enough variety to keep the boss encounter lively as a whole, but this thing fights like all the small dogs of the Souls games, but bigger. Spontaneous, erratic, hard to predict. Dodging the damn thing doesn't feel all that good when he has blink and you'll miss it telegraphs. But the cracks in this boss fight grow even larger when addressing the real problem with this fight. The arena. The agility of the wolf, with the cramped space of the debate hall, are contrasting reminders that an arena can ruin a boss fight. The wolf is already very aggressive, which is exacerbated by the tight space by making the player feel like they have no breathing room. He loves to evade and jump all around the arena erratically, making him a difficult boss to pin down and punish. And these are just the issues I have with the arena. So, what is the player rewarded with for mastering the Red Wolf's moveset in a lousy arena? Learning that the wolf has a paper-thin health pool, which the weak health pool helps justify the wolf's boundless, spontaneous energy, because if he weren't so evasive, this fight would be over even quicker. Before I delve into the mechanics of Lich Dragon Force Axe, I wanted to address a mild elephant in the room. Coincidentally, the bosses that I've deemed the least fun in Elden Ring seem to be a lot of the copy-paste boss experiences, 4 out of the 6 of them so far, to be honest. The Godskins show up everywhere in the base game, as do the Valiant Gargoyles in the form of copy-paste gargoyles or their Black Blade kindred cousins. The Red Wolf of Radagon has some stray siblings throughout the lands between, and even Estelle has a twin. Lich Dragon is yet another victim. Seriously, every single ancient dragon fight in Elden Ring feels exactly the same. Spammy AoEs, massive melee hitbox where you may or may not get a punish, tanky stance health, and the lack of a Madeir-esque mechanic where hitting the head is incentivized, since you do decent enough damage just giving them a claw trimming. I mean, sure, you do better damage when you hit Lich Dragon's head, but good luck getting a decent opportunity with that if you don't have a ranged option. Lich Dragon is no exception, with only a few unique moves to their name. Some Death Lightning, and a cool spinning lightning melee attack that is way easier to roll than it looks. Honestly, I don't have much to say for this boss, because all dragons in Elden Ring, except for 2, frankly bore me. The pacing of this fight feels like it spends way too much time dedicated to sprinting around AoEs, waiting for the dragon to come back down to earth, and this fight feels way more spectacle than substance because it doesn't offer anything interesting in terms of mechanics. The pacing of this fight is thrown off even further because Lich Dragon has a surprisingly low health pool. The Erdtree avatar is a boss I've tried and ultimately failed to truly enjoy as much as I probably should. Let's start with the moveset. The Erdtree avatar relies heavily upon ranged attacks to keep the player at bay throughout the fight, whether it's the avatar's Thorn AoEs, Land of Shadow, or its third phase explosion. And even its melee attacks are generally performed from a distance, such as its arm sweeps, slams, and its charge attack. The only attacks that are truly close range are when it uses its head for melee. Now, the moveset is varied enough to be interesting, but I want to face the hard facts. The thorns are cool to jump over and dodge, but have weird hitboxes that can clip the player. Its arm sweep attacks can also have weird hitboxes that feel bigger than they should, making them tricky to dodge. And while the charge attack isn't as bad as, say, Osteros from Dark Souls 3, the timing can be pretty tight. A fair amount of the avatar's melee attacks put the head in a position to be hit for optimal damage, but the window you get is a little too small because the avatar could start up another attack, punishing you for trying to be opportunistic. Ideally, you want to go into this fight with a ranged option, because this fight can be a slog for melee-only users, especially because with the rest of the moveset, the Erdtree avatar is either using attacks from a ranged position so you can't punish it, or, in the case of a charge attack, it's putting itself in a position where you can't hit it, or, with the case with the impenetrable thorns, you have no choice but to back off. All of the avatar's moveset is designed to get the player to back off while it spams attacks from a distance, a quality that does not make for an engaging affair. And sure, it has a small health pool, but this flower has the gall to respawn itself twice, prolonging this glorified cat and mouse chase. Half of that puzzle boss that From keeps making us fight for the last decade, where you hit a special enemy, and half that one mage fight From throws in at least once a game, when it comes to mechanics. And while the rapping is different and frankly more polished than ever before, it's still not necessarily the most engaging fight. The first phase is whack-a-mole 3 times, then viciously beat a defenseless and depressed enemy into submission. Sure, the creepy singing children telepathically throw books at the player's face, but those can be easily sprinted around. And they can also spit fire, but the same sprinting tactics will do the trick. And even if those hits connect, it's not like this phase holds any real danger. The second phase is where things get interesting, although only marginally so. Comet Azure looks dangerous enough, but is an attack that rewards positioning, as it acts as a giant opening if you rush Renala, as the comet will go right over you. The rest of Renala's moveset is various casts, such as Star Shower, Shattering Crystal, Comet, and Full Moon, where she's distancing herself from the player, but unlike, say, Estelle, her low poise makes it so that aggression is rewarded by knocking her out of the cast, and unlike Jory, she has no way of getting away from the player quickly, save for floating away from us. Same goes for her scepter attacks. Where this fight loses points for me is that the pacing of this fight has 2 settings. A speed blitz where Renala is absolutely dominated, or she spams her summons, elongating the fight to the point where it overstays its welcome. And the reason why this pacing is so lopsided is Renala's summon mechanic is her only real defense to keep the player at bay. It has a fast telegraph where if the player is caught, they will get knocked back. Renala is balanced enough to not spam her spells while her summons are active, thankfully, but she will float away from you while her summons distract you. In truth, no great boss in From's catalog is remembered for their amazing summon mechanics, while the real boss just flies away. So let's be so for real. Oh, let's also not forget, this boss is a massive middle finger to any build that relies on magic damage as its main form of offense. I won't go after the low-hanging fruit when I rank the Regal Ancestor Spirit by saying how this fight isn't challenging and that's why it's not fun. That'd be way too simple. Rather, let's delve into the mechanics on why the Regal Ancestor Spirit is so meh that there's really no real point in fighting him on repeat runs. Moveset-wise, the Regal Ancestor Spirit is pretty cool with majestical leaps, bounds, charges, and spiritual magic showers, and it's really cool how the Regal Ancestor Spirit absorbs the spirits of other animals to dictate what moves it's going to use. I think From really flexed their creativity with that element of the fight, and adds something fresh to this boss. The melee moveset is well telegraphed, and strafing the spirit magic feels really clean. I'm not even offended by the Regal Ancestor Spirit's ability to heal, since the poor thing needs something to help even the odds against inevitable slaughter. What makes the Regal Ancestor Spirit really suffer in terms of pacing is its teleportation. That teleport will have you running the length of an American football field just to return to the fight, at which point the Regal Ancestor Spirit will engage you in combat, which is way more satisfying when it goes melee, or it will just float right out of reach, raining down magical showers. So this fight wastes your time by having you sprint to the boss, only for it to disengage with you further, forcing you to wait till Reindeer Games gets his ass back down to earth. But yeah, Bambi's dad is a cool fight, if not short-lived, since to even get this footage and make him live long enough, I had to use a plus 16 weapon to not delete him too quickly. I'm going to be honest, this feels a bit higher than what Reichert deserves. But looking at the competition before him and what comes after, this feels like the most appropriate spot. For anyone who has a soft spot for this fight, I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend that much time talking about it. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's just another Stormroller gimmick boss fight. Is it a better Stormroller fight? Yes, absolutely, of course it is. I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge that. First off, the Serpent Hunter itself is a joy to use with its fully fleshed out moveset to take down the Serpent of Blasphemy. Both phases of Rykard's fight are satisfying, with the God-devouring Serpent having a mix of magma slings, poison spewing, and bites. Rykard himself has a mix of Rancor sorceries, stabs and slashes with his blasphemous blade, and frankly, unleashing the power of Hellfire. Like, how else do I describe this attack? It's insane. It's a good fight, but it is still more spectacle than substance. Once you've witnessed the majesty that is Rykard's fight, that's pretty much the beginning and end of it. Rykard is a pain to fight any way other than the intended way of using the Serpent Hunter, meaning there's only one truly definitive way to fight him. It invalidates any diversity of builds, which is kind of the pull of Elden Ring. So when you only have one set way to fight a boss, that is going to detract from its overall quality and how enjoyable the fight is on repeat runs. This is the first version of Loretta that appears on this ranking, and to be honest, there is very little reason to revisit this fight once you've had a taste of the real deal. So I'll keep this entry short, to leave talking points for her Erdtree version. But half of a moveset of a very good boss is, once you know it, still a good boss. Loretta's kit has a bit of everything. Carry failings to make the player question how aggressive it can be, halberd swings from neutral and dashing to keep the player on their toes, a star shower-like projectile to punish passivity and encourage you to close the distance, and her signature Great Bow to distance herself from you while launching a powerful attack. This fight is an excellent introduction to the level of variety of movesets that Elden Ring bosses can have. But again, this boss ranks so lowly because ultimately, this fight is a lesser version of an endgame boss. For similar reasons to the Royal Knight version of Loretta, Morgoth's little astral projection isn't getting anywhere near the heights of Elden Ring's peak in terms of maximum enjoyment and entertainment. But the same logic applies here. Half of a great boss is still a good boss. Morgoth's moveset has a bit of everything from dagger throws, delayed cane sweeps, slams and stabs, and Golden Order summoned weapons. The throwing daggers are especially satisfying, though they can be annoying when he uses them as an animation read. The retreating dagger throw feels really good to dodge, since it can be sprinted under, having it soar right past your face. The delayed attacks add a nice ebb and flow to combat where you're dodging and attacking him, and the delayed slams he has reward great positioning with a massive opening. Some of his summoned weapon combos can feel awkward to dodge, like this spinning sword combo, but it's still clean. Design-wise, his low stance health encourages player aggression. If there is anything that takes away from the fun factor of this fight, it's Morgoth exists purely as a victory lap for the player beating the game. Any semi-optimal build ran by a semi-competent player will clap him out of existence in under a minute. For the footage that I have here, I'm not even using a fully upgraded weapon, and he just gets dusted way too easily. And for the third entry in a row, we've got a boss that is a less fleshed out version of an endgame boss. What pushes Godfrey a cut above the rest is his moveset is more interesting and more dynamic as a whole than Royal Knight Loretta and Morgoth. Godfrey is a replica of Godfrey's first phase, sans a few signature abilities, but still a very fun moveset to engage with. For quick axe combos with reasonable punish windows, standalone stomps that can be strafed to reward good positioning with punish, side stomps that can be jump punished, overhead axe swings that can be cleverly strafed for a big opening. If there's anything that detracts from the enjoyment of this fight, it's that Godfrey's moveset is a bit lacking in diversity and shakeups, especially when you've had a taste of a real Horaloo. And let's talk about the arena of this fight. It doesn't take away too much from it, but it can be a bit messy if Godfrey forces the fight into the corners of the arena, especially near the opening. Like Margit before, Godfrey ends up feeling more like a trivial speed bump rather than an actual engaging challenge on its own. To open this entry, let me be clear. I don't have a disdain for the Fire Giant. I'd even go so far to say that the big guy can be a fair amount of fun, but that doesn't stop him from being a mid-boss in the grand scheme of things. Let's unpack what the Fire Giant has going for him. The first phase has a very diverse kit. He has the Snow Avalanche, his stomps, shield slams, sweeps, fireballs, and his use of Flame of the Fell God. The Snow Avalanche you can see coming from a mile away and acts as an adrenaline-pumping start to the fight. His stomps are well telegraphed for a giant enemy whose full body isn't fully in view. His shield slams are predictable, and his sweeps can even be sprinted past. The fireballs in the first phase are only used as a ranged option. Now, for the annoyances of the first phase. Flame of the Fell God is essentially a mosquito that distracts from the real fight, and acts as area denial once it detonates, similar to the Fire Giant using Burn O Flame. And his damn rolling. I've mentioned it in previous entries. Bosses that chronically run away don't make for an engaging and entertaining boss. And the more he runs away, the more the fight drags. It can be especially awkward because you'd think in an arena this massive, there couldn't possibly be any issues with it, but the uneven terrain can result in the Fire Giant rolling to a place where you can't easily hack and slash at his ankles. While his moveset is nice enough in the first phase, it's hard not to view the Fire Giant as a glorified punching bag in the first phase because of how slow his attacks are. Now, the second phase. The enjoyment for the second phase lives and dies by the player being good at fighting bosses while not locked on. Once you accept that his hands are meant to be hit, the Fire Giant's second phase can become a lot more engaging, dynamic, and feel like a real David versus Goliath. The epic feeling can be shattered if the Fire Giant keeps spamming rolling away and using Flame of the Fell God to waste your time. Fortunately, Torrent is usable in this boss fight unlike many others. Torrent can be used to trigger Flame of the Fell God so they're no longer an issue. It can be used to dramatically close the distance on the Fire Giant. His Eruption attack acts as a massive opening, especially for status and stance break builds. Now, the one attack that does genuinely suck in this fight is his Flame Breath, and that's because Elden Ring's fire physics are buggy as hell. But generally speaking, the Fire Giant has a lot going for him. It's too bad that he is generally a flawed fight to a certain capacity. The Divine Beast Dancing Lion feels a lot like Fire Giant to me. Not in terms of mechanics. Mechanically, they share very little in common. They're similar to me in the sense that as much as I enjoy them, I have about as many reasons to not care about them and wish to scrub them from my brain. Most of Divine Beast Dancing Lion's moveset is very well telegraphed, with punishable openings such as his forward smoke breath, his bite grab, his spinning lunges, and smoke spin attack. The smoke breath is especially fun to sprint horizontally from, the bites can be easily punished with a backward dodge into attack, and the smoke spin attack is really fun to jump over and provides a nice punish window. While still addressing the first phase, there are moments to where the Dancing Lion feels a bit like the Red Wolf of Radigan, where it feels like there's barely any telegraph to his attacks, and a lot of his windups feel really similar to one another. Now, another talking point that it has to be spoken about. The camera. The fight with the Dancing Lion can quickly turn into a wrestle with Brum's infamous camera, where one moment you're hanging in there, and the next you're at the whims of the camera, wondering what the hell is even going on, especially if you're near a wall. This is where the boss arena works against you, since against the wall is where most of the camera shenanigans begin. If the boss arena were just slightly bigger in all dimensions, this would be less of an issue. That being said, the boss arena forces the player to be mindful of where they position and maneuver themselves against the Dancing Lion's assault. Stay towards the middle of the arena and there will be less camera issues. Unlike, say, Malekith or Godfrey, where you meet aggression with aggression, the Dancing Lion asks the player to be mindful of when they take the offensive. Now, as for the second phase, like the first phase, it has as much fun going for it as it does obnoxious mechanics. To begin, the second phase can swap between any one of 3 phases between lightning, wind, and ice, each with their own unique quirks. Lightning adds a ton of AoEs to attacks and gives the Dancing Lion a lightning spear. Wind adds extended storm hitboxes to all of the Dancing Lion's attacks and gives it a massive Divine Beast tornado. Ice adds frostbite AoEs to attacks and gives access to Divine Beast Frost Stomp. Unlike most phases for bosses which are triggered by health, Divine Beast automatically switches between elemental phases every 30 seconds. That being said, it adds a layer of RNG that ends up feeling like it takes away from boss consistency. And while I can appreciate spontaneity and the dynamic nature of the second phase, it makes mastering this fight more frustrating because it's rare that you get the same fight twice. Some people love that. I can't say that I do, especially when each of the phases has some quirks that can be obnoxious. The lightning phase AoE tends to have a lack of punish windows. The wind phase can have some pretty sus hitboxes, same with the ice phase. Ultimately, this boss ends up landing in the middle because as much as I love parts of it, I end up hating other pieces of it. The Draconic Tree Sentinel feels like the natural evolution of the Tree Sentinel formula. Similar to Royal Knight Loretta, the Draconic Tree Sentinel has a kit that covers all of its bases. It has powerful, sweeping, colossal attacks that have a reasonable telegraph and decent punishable windows on most attacks. You do need to be mindful with its moveset, since some of its slower slams can be followed up with a quick swipe. Its big overhead slams have great openings to punish. Speaking of punishes, the opening of his fight gives plenty of time to just wail on the Draconic Tree Sentinel, because he does this grand pose before stomping at you. Good positioning is rewarded, because if you hang out on his shield side, he will attack with his shield, which has way less range and is slower, leading to a solid punish. Where the Draconic Tree Sentinel can be a bit annoying is his fireball attacks, meant to act as a ranged option for punishing passivity and as an animation read for daring to heal. The Draconic Tree Sentinel loves his fireball and will spam it if you don't close the distance quickly enough, which would be fine if he didn't also have a version of fireball where the Draconic Tree Sentinel rears back slightly and then launches the fireball. Because of Elden Ring's fire physics, this fireball can splash and hit you even if dodged properly. The second phase introduces the Draconic Tree Sentinel's weapon being buffed with Draconic Lightning and using Ancient Dragon Lightning incantations. Red Thunderbolt is pretty fun to dodge with an intuitive tell. Dodge as the shield lowers and you should be good. The added lightning effects to the Draconic Tree Sentinel's attacks don't add much of a threat because the Tree Sentinel's attacks already had an impact AoE in the first phase. The final 2 attacks introduced in the Draconic Tree Sentinel's kit in the second phase, I could frankly do without. The first is an attack similar to Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, where red lightning is telegraphed before striking down all around. This attack can sometimes be punished, and other times RNG isn't on your side and Zeus smites you. This has ruined so many no-hits for me. The last attack, I suppose, could be considered the Draconic Tree Sentinel's ultimate, where he charges up his weapon with lightning and slams it down twice after taking 5 years for each slam. The first slam is pretty consistent to dodge, the second not so much, and it generally feels safer to just run the hell away. All in all, the Draconic Tree Sentinel is an engaging boss fight that is bogged down by some tedious mechanics with questionable hitboxes, but this fight isn't void of pacing issues. The entire moveset I mentioned, and as engaging as it can be totally avoided. Most optimal builds will stomp all over the Draconic Tree Sentinel. sometimes before he can even get off 2 or 3 attacks, and without trying all that hard. So that puts this boss fight in an awkward position of being an enjoyable enough fight that can be over before it even begins. Godric Regrafted is very much what I would consider to be standard fare of what to expect from an Elden Ring boss. Everything about him drips with engagement, moderately paced attacks on a slight delay that rewards the player who dodge and then attack, leap attacks with intuitive roll timing and generous punish windows. And of course, who can forget Godric's ground slams that can be jumped for skillful punishes. My favorite attack of all the first phase is Godric's flurry attack. It's just really satisfying to dodge as a whole. His phase transition gives a generous opening where Godric takes reduced damage, but this can still be a very useful opening for builds that use statuses and percent-based damage. The second phase is, ironically, where Godric loses out a bit of that wow factor on repeat runs, and it isn't by inherent design. Godric's second phase kit is cool with dragon fire attacks and flame effects igniting new life into his moveset. The opening of the second phase even has a fantastic punish, because if you charge at Godric while he's using dragon fire, you get this massive punish window to just wail on him. Bear Witness comes back in full force with an opportunity for a jump punish. The entire fight is an excellent ebb and flow in combat. So, why does Godric lose that fun factor if everything I've described is good? It's frankly an issue that almost all of the early to mid-game of Elden Ring has on NG+. Godric gets taken out entirely too quickly. Even with a weaker weapon, this boss can barely contend with a completed build, and can barely keep up with the Tarnished on a fresh new game, causing him to truly live up to his title of the runt of the demigods. I'm going to open this entry with a bit of a hot take. Starscourge Radahn has always been a bit of an overrated boss in my eyes, and the hype surrounding him is pure pathos rather than addressing his actual mechanics. So, let's unpack his mechanics, because as I mentioned, this ranking is all about how fun Elden Ring bosses are based on their mechanical integrity. The beginning of the fight opens with Radahn sniping arrows at range with 3 different variants: his long shot, his scatter shot, and Radahn's rain. The long shot is a pretty hype way to lead into the fight while the player charges at Radahn. Radahn's rain is fair game, since it's essentially Eldritch's rain of arrows from Dark Souls 3, but improved because you have way more room to maneuver and makes clever use of Torrent to outrun the arrows. Scatter shots are kind of trash. Sometimes they have reliable hitboxes, other times they clip you, and it's really a toss-up on whether you get hit or not. There's nothing inherently wrong with the arrow phase, except, well, it's a little broken. A not so well kept secret is if you run backwards at the beginning of a fight, Starscourge Radahn will despawn. From there, you can close in on Radahn on horseback, and Radahn will forget to use his arrow phase entirely and start charging at you. While this definitely isn't intended design, it's a pretty hype way to have Radahn charging at you across the desert. As for the main battle, Radahn's first melee phase is engaging enough with slams and sword combos. The sword combos are fun enough to dodge, but they can be just as easily avoided by positioning yourself right in his crotch, giving you free rein to hack and slash while his attacks miss you completely. I'd say this is clever, but it feels a little brain dead. Fortunately, toward the end of his sword combos, you do have to dodge, so it makes it so that Radahn isn't totally a punching bag. Radahn also has something of a phase 1.5 when he buffs his swords with Cragblade. I generally like this move because it rewards the player with good positioning by offering an extremely generous opening. The only annoying part is Radahn won't buff with Cragblade unless you are standing directly in front of him when he starts the animation, so he will just scramble around like an idiot if you try chasing after him. Upon starting phase 1.5, Radahn gains access to his signature Starcaller Cry, which is a satisfying enough attack to dodge. The attack is a positioning and dodging puzzle. Dodging the initial cry gives an awesome opening, and if you position yourself to Radahn's front, he will do the follow-up slam, giving another massive opening if dodged correctly. And who can forget Radahn's iconic leap into the sky, coming crashing down from the heavens as a meteor. Again, I have been pretty complimentary about the Star Scourge, so what detracts from the enjoyment of this fight? A few things, really. The arrow phase, while initially pretty neat, is a built-in run-back assuming that you don't skip it altogether by breaking it. His first phase moveset, while engaging enough by encouraging good positioning by sticking to him like glue, leads to the fight feeling like a one-sided affair. This one-sidedness is exacerbated even further by the fact that Radahn has so many attacks with huge openings, where Radahn is essentially at the whims of your DPS. So, this fight suffers from pacing issues the same way that Godric does, where, sure, Radahn does have a fully fleshed out second phase, but unless you're doing a challenge run or using a weapon that isn't appropriately upgraded, you will never really see it. So with all of his mechanics considered, Star Scourge Radahn is an above average fight that is frankly held back by his fragile health pool in the face of competent builds and players. If only we fought him in his prime. Placidus Axe is easily a cut above nearly every dragon fight in Elden Ring, and certainly every dragon fight in the base game. The first phase has a fair amount of AoEs, but has the lack of RNG elements with dragons and ancient dragons, because his ancient dragon incantations target you directly. The same goes for the Fire Breath attack, where Placidus Axe will launch it in response to you positioning yourself at his sides and tail. In a lot of ways, Placidus Axe is a positioning puzzle. His lightning dragon claws will be used if you're at his front, and his wing slams will be used when you're at his sides, similar to how his lightning strikes and flame breath are also triggered by positioning. The neat thing about all of these attacks is most of them can be avoided by sprinting, and you can manipulate his behavior based on where you move, making Placidus Axe fairly predictable and consistent. And consistency is key for From Software boss fights feeling good. And who could forget Placidus Axe Dragon Bolt and Nuke? The spectacle! The flair! Now, I'm not immune to hype, but let's be real about the Dragon Bolt Nuke. It is just a get the hell away from me attack, with not too much interesting going on mechanically because you're given no choice but to just run away. It doesn't make it any less hype to behold though. That being said, the second phase is totally where it's at, with Placidus Axe rising into the air and becoming one with the clouds. You get a brief moment to reset before Placidus Axe dives back into combat with his thundercloud form. The second phase introduces Placidus Axe taking the fight way more seriously, with teleportation into claw combos, leading to a really cool cat and mouse ebb and flow to the combat. I can't say that there's any other fight in Elden Ring that's quite like it, and props to From Software for designing these teleport attacks in a way where there's no camera tomfoolery, because you can lock on to Placidus Axe while he teleports. He retains the same AoE attacks as the first phase, but only uses those occasionally, sticking with his teleporting melee. He also gains access to another version of Thundercloud form, where he teleports away, glides through the air, and then slams back down again. The hitboxes on this version of Thundercloud form can feel a little off if you try dodging from neutral, but feels much more consistent if you dodge out of a sprint, which is satisfying to pull off. When at about 25% health, Placidus Axe gets access to his ultimate, Ancient Dragon Lightning Strikes, into Thundercloud form, into Placidus Axe Ruin, a certain laser flame breath attack that should feel very familiar for Dark Souls 3 players. This attack can feel nigh undodgeable and that you're at the mercy of the lasers at first, but if you dodge the initial Thundercloud form slam and sprint to the right of Placidus Axe and then toward him, you will generally avoid most of, if not all of the nastiness of Ruin. So the way that I'm describing this fight makes it sound like a top 5 contender when it comes to Elden Ring boss fights, but this is where I shatter that bubble a little bit. For repeat runs, Placidus Axe is among one of the tankier bosses in all of Elden Ring, both with health and stance. So unless you're running a percent-based damage build, be prepared for a very long fight. And while the positioning puzzle aspects of Placidus Axe's fight are clever, sprinting into position to avoid large AoEs will never feel as engaging as dodging swift sword attacks to me. Like I said before, the nuke, while cool, is a massive time waster. And while I praised the teleport attacks, the window to retaliate on these attacks can feel very small, making some of the fastest weapons and reaction times still fail to connect. His tendencies to teleport away, use Thundercloud form, and use AoEs drag the fight's duration even longer than his health already calls for. And what's hilarious to me is Placidus Axe is playing hard to get in his second phase is the same exact behavior as Elden Beast, but you don't hear anyone saying a single thing about Dragon Lord being a slog to fight, do you? So, I'll be the first to say it. Placidus Axe can be very fun until the fight overstays its welcome. Now, to go from talking about a boss that is absolute hype to a boss that I feel is both underrated and slightly overhated in the Elden Ring community, Commander Nile. So let's address the mechanics that are not so fun first. Again, we've got a boss with gank elements where the AI's aggression is questionably aware of the other enemies in the room, leading to some very awkward situations, especially with how small the arena is for a 3v1. Nile's moveset is very simple, and the pacing is a bit strange with these super delayed halberd swings that take some time to get used to. His lightning stomp AoEs are massive and definitely not meant to be rolled, and my least favorite attack in this entire fight, his frost stomp. I haven't said this about a single attack on this list so far, but this frost stomp is bullshit. If he does this frost stomp point blank, your ass is going to be on the ground unless you're running light roll. Medium roll doesn't give you enough distance to fully iframe this attack, and the AoE will last longer than your iframes have. So, why is Nile this high? Well, to begin, this is probably the best gank fight in Elden Ring, where the dual-wielding Banished Knight is clearly the most aggressive combatant. The Sword and Board Knight follows slightly behind, and Nile hangs back applying buffs for the most part. Each gank part of the fight feels like they have their own unique place and contributes to the fight. It's not so haphazardly thrown together like, say, the Valiant Gargoyles and the Godskins. Both Banished Knights can be handled relatively swiftly with either spells from a distance, high damage weapon skills, or taking them to Parry Town, or baiting their leap attacks for a quick backstab. And once defeated, this fight becomes a proper one-on-one. Nile's moveset is frankly just a straightforward duel that would have fit very well in Dark Souls 3. His delay attacks do take some time to get used to, but each one gives a plentiful opening to retaliate. His lightning stomps in particular are really fun to jump counter, and best of all, through positioning yourself behind Nile, he's usually baited into using one of his lightning stomps, which, again, these lightning stomps feel like they're something straight out of Sekiro, and feel so clean to jump over. And his ultimate attack, this massive blizzard into a Storm Assault style attack, is really easy to dodge and gives a massive window to bully him. It's a very engaging fight, where it is a solid back and forth once you do get to the one-on-one aspects of a fight, but it's held back by gank elements, and once again, the Frost Stomp really does suck. From one underrated boss to another, Romina definitely deserves some love. Mechanically, she has a pretty solid moveset with pole blade slashes, centipede lunges and rolls, and stinger swipes. It's all pretty standard fare to dodge or jump over for the daring. What's pretty neat is with good positioning, her attacks can completely miss. The coolest attack to dodge is definitely her plunging stinger attack. It's just really neat to see her lift into the air to definitely dodge and punish her. Romina generally has a fun moveset because there are so many ways to deal with her moveset, and her design definitely inspires out-of-the-box solutions. So, what detracts from the enjoyment of this fight? Let's start with the phase transition. It's an AoE with no telegraph, opening immediately, and if you're not expecting it, or even if you are expecting it and have the misfortune of being point blank on her, it's guaranteed damage. Like I've mentioned before, guaranteed damage takes the controller right out of the player's hands. The rest of the phase transition past the AoE is fine, even pretty interesting, because there are pockets where her rot butterflies don't spawn at all, and sometimes it can be right under Romina, leading to a satisfying punish. That being said, the rot butterfly spawns are pure RNG, and this opening isn't always consistent. Her moveset is largely unchanged from the first phase, but Romina spends way more time generating distance between her and the player by either spamming rot butterflies, flying across the arena with slashes, crawling to change her position. This fight has a bit of a cat and mouse mechanic, where chasing after her doesn't always feel very engaging. And on occasion, her hitboxes don't feel all that good, and there's moments where she's just swinging at nothing while you dumbly hack at her. Still, it is an interesting enough encounter. The best dragon fight in all of Elden Ring easily lives up to the legend that is Baal the Dread. First off, this fight is an evolution to Dark Eater Midir, in the way that the fight makes it even more engaging, and it's really a simple change, by giving Baal a second weak point. Baal has two weaknesses, hitting his head like Midir, or hitting his broken stump. It makes it so that no matter where you position yourself against Baal, you should be able to get a clean hit against him. As far as how Baal is an improvement on every dragon in Elden Ring, let's look at the simple facts. Locking onto him doesn't turn the fight into a total camera nightmare, though it can have some jarring camera moments, won't lie about that. Every single one of his attacks, be it a wing slash, a bite, a flame breath attack, a slam, or a tail whip, Baal's head generally is in position for you to land a hit if you correctly dodged Baal. That being said, not all weapons are created equal against the dragon. If you have a weapon that excels in close range, like claws, fists, beast claws, hand-to-hand arts, you're going to have a much harder time being able to capitalize on punishes. Baal feels a lot better with a weapon that is at least as long as a light greatsword, a greatsword, or great katana. The more range, the better. Baal is definitely a boss that takes some time to adjust to due to his timings, since the size of his hitboxes can be pretty big, and exact timing can be pretty precise. But once you learn these timings, Baal can become really fun to fight, with his first phase feeling especially consistent. Emphasis on his first phase feeling very consistent. His second phase gives me a mix of emotions on how much I enjoy it on repeat runs. On the one hand, Baal's intensity is cranked to 11, where he erupts with molten ire and takes flight for a truly breathtaking aerial assault. Sprinting below him from the fire bolts is just grand, but the impending slam can feel pretty dodgy to get down perfectly. Most of Baal's moveset remains largely unchanged, with the additional flame lightning effects and having new mix-ups where Baal still feels consistent enough to punish. However, there's a bit of RNG behind it. Baal can spend a decent amount of time playing keep away if he goes from his breath attack into his ultimate flame lightning breath attack that he does an arena-wide double pass. You can genuinely go 30, 45 seconds to a minute without being able to land a single safe hit on Baal while he just spams massive AoE after massive AoE. And even more time if you don't know Baal's moveset perfectly, which can make his second phase very frustrating to learn. However, Baal's Flame Lightning Eruption is the most hype attack in the game to jump counter, and gives a plentiful opening. All in all, Baal is a great fight, that has some pacing issues and does punish certain weapon choices and has some of the same god-awful fire physics, but he is still, by and large, one of the best dragons From has ever made. Wow, so is this the second time that I put a legendary dragon below some lowly commander? Yes it is. I swear this isn't intentional or rage bait, but I'm going to be honest with you all. I vastly prefer humanoid and rider type bosses over giant creature bosses because I find them more engaging. That's just the simple truth of it. As for Commander Gaius, like Niall, I feel he's a bit underrated and overhated. So, like Niall, let's address the not so fun mechanics of Gaius first. The elephant in the room, or rather the boar in the room, the opening charge attack is deplorable. Because From Software decided to put hitboxes on the boar's tusks and hooves, this attack is truly way harder to dodge than it has any right being. And because of the multiple hitboxes, if the charge connects, it will do variable amounts of damage. Let me be clear, I'm sure that this is an oversight, but let's not be surprised if From never patches it at this point. And if someone said that this one attack was enough to put Gaius at the bottom of their list, I wouldn't blame them. But hear me out. There is a great boss through all the nonsense that is the charge attack. For one, the charge attack can be fairly consistently dodged by throwing off its tracking. Strafe to the right or the left, and then dodge in the opposite direction, and the boar should charge right past you. The rest of Gaius' moveset is pretty solid though. He closes in and attacks with his sword lance regularly, sometimes imbuing his attacks with gravity magic for a big AoE around the attack. He incorporates the boar into his moveset with slams, kicks, and lunges, and will occasionally use rock sling or gravity missile for the passive. It's a really engaging back and forth that can be very satisfying to dodge, although the pacing can be thrown off if you catch a stray, since Gaius is a big boy who will knock you right on your ass, and it can be really tough to get back into the rhythm of a fight. But with all that being said, this fight has a good flow, and that flow continues into the second phase. Unlike Romina, Gaius' phase transition is well telegraphed in this massive explosion, followed by spinning gravity thrust, which is a very fair attack to dodge with a plentiful window to punish him. Some of his attacks get added gravity effects, but that doesn't really change the timing of the attacks, and his fast gravity thrust can be very fun to watch as he dives right over you. And of course, his sword lance and boar combo is such a fun attack to dodge, causing the player to be mindful of their dodge positioning to not get clipped by their tusks or the lance. The drawback of this fight is mainly the charge is just, it's laughably bad. And like I said before, From is probably never fixing it. And some of his attack AoEs can have questionable hitboxes. One last complaint is, despite Torrent being summonable for this fight, mounted combat is so bad that you're never going to have a proper joust with him, and it really is wasted potential for this fight. If Godric established the standard of what to expect out of an Elden Ring boss, Morgott truly perfected the formula. Morgott has possibly the most complex moveset out of all the Remembrance bosses in Elden Ring's base game. He takes everything from his Margit form and cranks it to 11. His sword swings are more aggressive than ever. His summoned daggers now come out as a trio. He has access to a summoned spear throw, and regularly incorporates his summoned sword and giant crusher into his cursed sword combos, and this is all just talking about his first phase. The pace of his fight is fast, but with moderate intervals of safe windows. For example, sprinting around one of his combos gives you a big opening. Closing in on his spear throw will cause the spear to sail over your head, giving you a safe punish. And most of his combos give you enough time to hit him between swings. And his most hype move of the first phase, his summoned sword rain, can be handled one of two ways. If you let him get it off, you'll have to be more mindful of spacing and positioning for a while. Or for the daring, you can go for more attacks and either DPS him into his second phase or potentially stance break him out of the sword range. The first and second phase are broken up by Morgott explosively unleashing his cursed blood when pushed to the brink. Similar to Gaius, this phase transition is well telegraphed and is a good get off me attack where the player has to be mindful of the subsequent blood explosions around the arena, but it does give a nice break from the fight's speed. With the second phase, Morgott gets the addition of his cursed blood, being able to unleash blood flame attacks, most notably his blood flame slice, slam, and grab attack. All of these attacks can be deadly, but can be avoided with timely dodges or good positioning. All in all, Morgott is a fantastic duel. But if that's the case, why isn't he in the top 10? And it's simple. The pacing of his fight, while good, is shortchanged by his fragile health pool. As I mentioned with Godric and Starscourge Radahn, Morgott doesn't have the health to really live up to the promise of his second phase unless you're doing a challenge run or in the upper NG plus cycles. The most competent builds and experienced players will crush Morgott, turning this character that should have been a respected rival into nothing more than a footnote in the tarnished crusade toward Elden Lord. Loretta, Knight of the Erdtree, is what I consider to be the peak of the Rider-type boss fight in Elden Ring's base game. The Royal Knight version of Loretta was already more complex than the base Tree Sentinel and the Draconic Tree Sentinel, and this fight simply takes what was already there and perfects it. She's a very aggressive boss with a kit equipped to deal with the player from every distance at every angle. She will close the distance with halberd swings and usually follows up with another swing. She has delayed swings, swings from overhead, and if you cling to her side, she'll do a 2-hit halberd combo. And the Erdtree version of Loretta starts the fight with access to her signature slash to act as a gap closer. Every single one of her attacks feels consistent to dodge and strafe, giving a fair opening to counterattack. She also has a donkey kick that her horse does if you try hanging out at her backsides for cheap shots. I suppose what I really like about her melee moveset is it's all dependent on player positioning, which is what makes this fight feel all the more dynamic. Her sorceries are really cool as well. Carrion Phalanx makes a return to make the player question how aggressive they can play with Loretta. Her glintstone sorceries are meant to punish the player for trying to play too aggressively. I suppose a complaint is that she can spam her magic projectiles pretty chronically up to 6 times, but the trick is to gradually dodge forward and toward her to bring the fight back to melee range. This is more evident in her second phase, when trying to dodge to the side will result in getting clipped by the magic projectiles. It's a subtle way to teach the player how to properly react. If there is a bit of a letdown, it's that her second phase isn't all that dynamic and doesn't change much. Her great bow does evolve into Loretta's mastery, where the dodge timing is more precise, and she gets a new empowered version of Loretta's slash, which is frankly one of the coolest attacks to dodge. But you know what's even more cool? When the hitboxes are so precise that you can duck underneath the first 2 slashes while only needing to roll the last one. Loretta is an excellent fight, although it is a delicate balancing act where a boss is adept at melee and sorcery. She can also have runs where she will keep her distance and jump away to keep spamming spells, which can be obnoxious, but nonetheless, she is just shy of the peaks of Elden Ring's combat in my eyes. What makes Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame, such an excellent boss experience mechanically is multifaceted. His attacks, despite being themed around madness and chaos, ironically have a very nice tempo to them. The real fight begins with Midra gracefully stepping forward with unendurable frenzy, an attack that is very intimidating, but if you close the gap and stick to Midra like glue, good positioning gets rewarded with ample time to punish Midra for committing to such a lengthy attack animation. From there, Midra's kit has a lot of diversity to it. Basic sword combos with moderate pacing that have a very natural dodge timing to them with a decent punish window, and versions of a sword combo that are meant to roll catch with this double swiping motion for those that are careless with their dodge timing and positioning. A sword combo where Midra stabs forward and explodes the barbs of his blade for a dynamic finisher to his combo. Sword attacks where he mixes in frenzied incantations. A graceful, gliding sweep attack with a slight delay, and one of my favorite attacks, his spin move, where the hitboxes are so precise you can duck just under it and avoid all damage. He also has quick stabs from the barbs stuck in his hand to change up the tempo. It's all a very beautifully composed dance that is really satisfying to dodge and very engaging. Some of his madness beams can be a bit annoying to dodge though, especially because some of their patterns are pretty unpredictable. It can cause you to catch strays when it feels like you probably shouldn't, but he tends to only use those when you keep your distance. The second phase opens with a massive madness explosion, similar to Malenia's Scarlet Aeonia, which is a great way to slow down the pacing and allow both the player and boss to reset for the remaining bout to come. Midra tends to open the second phase in one of two ways: closing the distance with a sweeping slash, or doing a frenzied beam. Both of them can be difficult to read with all the yellow flame effects around, and both come out pretty fast. In truth, while Midra's frenzied incantations add great variety to the fight, I do find them to be one of the weaker aspects in terms of engagement, but I can't fault them too much because it does add nice pacing to the fight with mix-ups. I'll explain that a little bit later on. Midra's second phase adds a few new melee attacks like his Golden Crux, which has this pretty nasty grab if it connects, and has an AoE explosion if you dodge the first part, which can catch first-time players off guard, but gives an awesome punish window once you learn the timing. He gets frenzied empowered slams and dragging sword attacks that give me major Abyss Watcher vibes and are very satisfying to dodge. My favorite attack of Midra's is his 5-piece combo of burning slashes. What I love a lot about Shadow of the Erdtree bosses is a lot of them get these showstopper moves that feel similar to Waterfowl Dance and Spectacle, but are way more intuitive to dodge, and this one is especially great. So far, Midra has gotten a lot of praise, and he does deserve it. If there is a complaint to be had, it is for how complex Midra's kit is. If you have a stance break centered build, none of it will matter because you will smash right through his health pool with very little resistance and wonder what all the hype was about. This makes learning Midra a bit of a pain. He's not nearly as demanding to dodge as a Malenia, a Promised Consort, or R'Lana, so you can leave this fight thinking that he's pretty simple, but on repeat playthroughs, learn that he has a wealth of moves. Fortunately, his incantations force the player to back off, but this also distracts from the more engaging parts of his kit, and his massive health pool helps offset how low his stance is. And here she is, Lady Pontiff Maria, Blade of Mesmer. If this ranking were purely on complexity alone, R'Lana would easily find herself in the top 3 bosses of Elden Ring. I have a lot of positive to say about R'Lana because in truth, she is effectively the amalgamation of Pontiff Sullivan, Lady Maria, and Malenia, and wouldn't you know it, when you combine the mechanics of 3 amazing bosses, you get an amazing boss. She has a ton of intricate combos that have a variety of ways that R'Lana can finish her combo, with the key being knowing what moves she uses to close out her combos to gain a satisfying punish. Which, speaking of satisfying, what makes R'Lana such a good boss is all the ways that you can engage with her moveset by dodging, jumping, parrying, and deflecting. And all of her melee attacks have a variety of different tempos, from a blazing fast spin combo into a strong delayed swing, to 2 hyperbolic dual sword swings, and a moderately fast cross-slash combo. She also shares a move from Malenia, where she does this sidestep into a slash, and that's just unpacking the melee aspects of her moveset. She still has carrion failings like Loretta before her, and magic glimpse blades, both of which she can follow up into melee attacks, and of course, carrion grandeur, which is definitely a fun attack to dodge. Her second phase simply increases the danger by adding magic and flame attacks to her swords, where she gets new AoEs at the ends of some of her combos, new combo extenders, and her signature twin moons, which Shadow of the Erdtree gives you a friendly reminder that if you haven't been jumping attacks, you should probably start. It all comes together to make an excellent boss, but if that's the case, why is she barely scraping my top 10 for fun? Let's talk about her complexity as a whole. She's really demanding, and that alone doesn't take away from the fun, but does lead to some consistency issues. Sometimes she's relentless, sometimes she's incredibly passive, sometimes she consistently closes the gap with a finisher, and other times she backs off, throwing off your flow. So the pacing of a fight can be breakneck to moderate with way too much downtime. Next, some of her combos have a particular roll-catching quality that doesn't feel fantastic. Roll catches are typically meant to punish bad roll positioning or roll spamming, but with hers, so many of her attacks can clip you, even if you dodge the first part of the attack, because of how independent her sword arms move. Something that distinguishes Rolana from Malenia is, unlike Malenia, Rolana doesn't stun on hit. And depending on how you feel about Malenia, this is either an improvement or a detraction. On the one hand, you can't necessarily bully Rolana into submission via stun locking. On the other hand, unless you get a stance break, you cannot fully slow down Rolana's tempo. This leads to her dominating the tempo of the fight, which brings me to my final criticism. Rolana is a boss that is made for either parrying, deflecting, or stance breaking, and it is incredibly obvious that this is how she is supposed to be fought. All three of those tactics are the only way that you can tip the scales evenly in your favor, and it is very satisfying to parry or deflect her because you're taking your defense and turning it into your power for an interesting dichotomy, but inversely, it is a much harder fight if you decide to stick with just dodging and jumping her attacks. And stance breaking, on the other hand, can pretty much shut down Rolana to the point of making her second phase nigh non-existent. So yeah, it is natural that some builds will do better than others and vice versa depending on the boss, but I suppose my critique is how obvious it is in the case of Rolana. Oh, the Putrescent Knight. If you had asked me why I thought of this boss at Shadow of the Erdtree's launch, he would have been in the bottom 5 of this video. But as my fights with Putrescent Knight grew, my understanding and mastery of him made me love this boss more and more. He's essentially the Zenith of the Rider archetype in Elden Ring. Greater than Tree Sentinel, greater than Draconic Tree Sentinel, greater than Loretta, and greater than Gaius. I'll start with common complaints regarding Putrescent Knight, and something that I believed myself for a while, that Putrescent Knight rarely gives an opening and spends so much time running away. Like Rolana, Putrescent Knight has a very distinct combo finishers, where he will finish his combo with an upward swing before riding off, or a specific two-handed double slam. Unlike Rolana, Putrescent's moveset is less complicated, so he's more likely to end his combos the same way, adding a level of consistent pacing. Second, Putrescent Knight's moveset consistently leads him to come back to you. Let me repeat that. He comes back to you. What separates Putrescent Knight from most bosses who run from you is the way his moveset works. He will always try to close the distance on you, either with a cleaver throw into a slam or doing a running combo. Putrescent Knight's AI will also generally stick with switching between 2 to 5 hit combos that all have a decent opening after the finisher. But what I love about this fight is how useful rolling attacks are. Even with Putrescent's combos where he's riding away, a well-timed and positioned roll into a light attack will generally get a hit on him. This encourages timeliness and being clever with your dodging to act as your offense. And can we talk about how fun the horse combo is, where Putrescent Knight and his horse separate for this incredible combo. Like, this move is pure joy to dodge once you get the timing down, and at its conclusion you get a great opening for either a heavy attack or a weapon skill. And let's not forget the additions that the second phase brings, where the Putrescent begins using blue flames. Jumping those attacks, especially the ultimate, adds a much needed verticality element to the fight. So while I'm a Putrescent Knight defender, what stops this fight from being greater? Those rolling openings that I love so much were an absolute pain to learn, and some weapons rolling attacks just aren't fast enough to get a lick in, which in turn messes with the fight's pacing. While Putrescent Knight does always come back to engage, this fight still has moments where it's like, okay, can you get your ass back here already? And I also find that stance break builds in particular are ineffective against the Putrescent Knight because he disengages so often. Unless you are consistently hitting him at every possible opening, stance breaks are much harder to achieve with him, which feels pretty lousy as they are a core mechanic of Elden Ring. These pacing issues result in some bouts with the Putrescent Knight lasting way longer than they probably should. Oh, and his Roar AoE is a blemish on an otherwise great moveset. I imagine some people clicked on this video strictly to see where Promised Consort Radahn ranks, and yeah, when the dust settles, Promised Consort is easily among my top 10 bosses in Elden Ring, and let's unpack why. To begin, Promised Consort Radahn is the apex of what an Elden Ring boss can be. Let's start with the first phase. A spinning sword combo swung at a moderate tempo with an earth-shattering AoE at the end of it. Sword combos with a slight delay. A sword combo that is actually one of the hardest hitting grabs in the game. A Blood Flame Blade slash that is a nod to his new vessel. A quick, totally normal, not at all formally controversial cross slash as a change-up. Lion's Claw, which can turn to Savage Lion's Claw if Radahn chooses to follow it up. Starcaller Cry in an attempt to suck you in for a punishing follow-up. And of course, his Gravity Slam and his Meteor Sling. Every single one of these attacks is immensely engaging. Every single attack demands the player's utmost attention, with openings sometimes feeling few and far between depending on how Radahn chooses to fight you. If nothing else, this fight does have reliably safe openings after his Gravity Slam, his combo ending in AoE, his Cross Slash, Lion's Claw, and Blood Flame Slash. I'm not saying his other combos don't have openings. Most of Promised Consort's combos do, but depending on what attack he decides to follow up with, your time to attack him may be extremely limited, and he could hit you while you're still in the recovery animations of punishing him. But, with that in mind, the first phase is an excellent balance of player versus boss, where the player's mastery of Elden Ring's combat is truly put to the test. And then comes the second phase, which, don't get me wrong, I generally want to like the second phase of Promised Consort's fight, and I more or less do, but I won't lie and say that's a masterpiece. Let's unpack its anatomy. More often than not, Radahn opens with Light of Mikola, easily one of the biggest get-off-of-me attacks in Elden Ring. It's clean enough, giving just enough time to sprint away from the massive AoE, and acts as a reset moment for the player and boss where you can heal, reapply buffs, and then sprint back into the action. You can also use Raptor of the Mist to invalidate the AoE, which gives a neat niche interaction. From there, everything about Promised Consort's fight is made all the more intense. Every single one of his combos now ends with light AoEs following up his strikes. This is very similar to how in Mohg's second phase, all of his attacks add blood flame to the ground, forcing the player to be mindful of their dodge positioning. I'll save criticisms to the light effects for later to keep my thoughts coherent. Radahn gains access to several new moves in his second phase. His grab, which is the most telegraphed grab in From history, is really easy to dodge with a safe punish. Lightspeed Slash is way more scary looking than it actually is, since the tech is generally strafing around it. His light clones are pretty much a faster version of Malenia's rock clones and can be treated similarly by sprinting away and then dodging the finisher. His final 3 attacks are his showstoppers of various quality. His second phase Meteor Sling is now a 2-part attack. The meteors need to be sprinted and jumped away from, followed by the light clones, which, like the last ones, sprint away and then dodge at the end. I can't say I fully like this attack because it's mostly a get off of me attack that has an opening at the end. The attack Promised Consort is really fun to dodge and an absolute joy with a solid punish window at the end of it. And lastly, his Lightspeed Meteor, which is, like the Starscourge version, another massive AoE spectacle. So that breaks down the full fight, so what do I make of it? It's definitely a test of endurance and patience. Almost all the attacks themselves are fair enough to dodge and really fun. Radahn truly tests how good you are at Elden Ring in a way that no other boss can. But this fight still has flaws even post-patch. To begin, the pacing is relentless. There is a very little downtime, and Radahn dominates the pacing. There are very few situations where you can control the tempo of this fight unless you can parry or stance break him. But let's talk about stance breaking Radahn. Radahn's stance regenerates at the same rate as Malenia, regenning after 6 seconds. There's a problem with this though. Radahn has a 33% more stance than Malenia. Radahn also has attacks that last longer than 6 seconds. If he does one of his meteor attacks, Light of Mikola, Lightspeed Slash, or Lightspeed Meteor, or even some of his basic sword combos, it will guarantee that Radahn regens a chunk of his stance health, if not all of it, if you miss the next opening to attack him. Next, the RNG factor of this fight is real. Promised Consort can either be a boss of similar demands to, say, Hoarah, Malekith, or Malenia, where it's demanding but a balanced fight where you get as many openings to punish Radahn as he does get moments to attack you. Or it can be light years harder than anything in Elden Ring. This is because his move pool is so vast, leading to fights feeling completely different depending on what Radahn chooses to do. I've stressed the importance of consistency leading to greatness in bosses, and I can't confidently say Radahn is necessarily a consistent experience. Lastly, the fucking arena. I said I would talk about it. The light beams themselves are not a problem. It's basic From Software to use an AoE to inform the player where they should and shouldn't be dodging. That's not the issue. The issue is the uneven terrain of the arena. This will result in situations where the light beams will reflect off the ground at just the right angle to hit stun the player. And with how hard Radahn hits, the light beam hit stun is enough for Radahn to hit you with one of his attacks as a follow-up, and it's game over even if you dodged correctly because of the light's hit stun from the arena. So, where Radahn stands now is he is among the best fights in Elden Ring. He's incredibly demanding with a complex and deep moveset that suffers from some issues in pacing, consistency, and that arena really messes with one of the main mechanics of his second phase. Unlike some rankings I've seen, I'm counting Radagon and Elden Beast as one collective boss, because that's how Elden Ring treats them. You don't beat the game until Elden Beast is finished. So, Radagon is the first phase, whereas Elden Beast is the second. I find this fight is really good in terms of creating a great ebb and flow with engaging ways to interact with both bosses' movesets. It is generally really consistent with boss fight pacing for the most part. We'll address the issues I have with this fight later, because I really like this fight. Yes, both Radagon and Elden Beast. To start, Radagon's first half is immaculate, with the exception of one attack. While most of Radagon's hammer swings are delayed, the delay feels intentional, powerful, and natural. Dodging and parrying his swings feels natural and intuitive. I'm especially fond of this backhand hammer swing, which can be strafed. The thing is, with Radagon, all of his combos tend to lead to an opening, and the more he attacks you, you have just as many openings as well. There are two attacks in his first phase that I don't particularly care for. The first is where he throws this golden spear into the ground, which acts as an area of denial. The reason why I'm not a huge fan of this move is because for a mostly melee-centric boss, being forced to back off feels a bit lame. Another attack that I don't care for with him is he has this golden sling, which is similar to Bestial Sling, except shitty. This thing comes out really fast, and while you can reaction dodge it, it's a 50-50 shot if it clips you or not. Fortunately, Radagon doesn't use it too much. I'm not even sure if I have footage of that attack, but you know it. Back to attacks that I love. Goldbreaker is satisfying in every regard. The Golden Stomp can be jump countered, and after Radagon lands, you have enough time for a charged heavy. At this point, depending on how much damage you've done to Radagon, it becomes a tale of two fights. You can perfectly script Radagon so that he teleports into position for his triple slam. This attack is so satisfying to punish. After each slam, you can do a rolling attack. After the second slam, you have enough time to get in two light attacks, a heavy attack, or a weapon skill. And then, if you mess with the positioning of the final slam, you can get one last punish to close out the fight. Sometimes you can finish Radagon before the final slam. What makes Radagon so great is the openings for those who master this fight are plentiful. They are before his combos, they are during his combos, they're at the end of his combos. This fight can be peak! Or you can get what I will refer to as full Psycho Radagon. Radagon's second phase adds more golden AoEs to his attacks, but that's not the issue. The issue is his teleport. This teleport is so obnoxious. It has a hitbox on it, so that when you get hit by it, you're likely to get hit by whatever attack Radagon follows up with, because he loves to attack coming out of that teleport. Like, this teleport didn't need a hitbox. It really didn't. Like, can we go back to Dark Souls 3 with Lorien and Lothric, please? Second, his second phase introduces Radagon to remembering that he studied Golden Order incantations because for whatever reason, he really likes to spell spam in this phase. This creates situations where the last quarter of his health pool is dominated by him spamming spells, teleporting, and comboing for 30 seconds. If this weren't a possibility, I would appreciate Radagon more. Like, I get why it exists, because really, Radagon's low health and low stance makes it so that he needs to have something to act as a defense before you blast right through him. However, this fight can be consistently scripted so that he never gets a second phase. So, this fight, while really good, can have serious pacing issues where Radagon is either getting obliterated or he's spending his time spamming as much as he can to make sure that you don't beat him and so that you blast through your resources before Elden Beast. The fight with Radagon is great, but not perfect. Now to Elden Beast. I suppose I'm going to have to be this dude's defense lawyer, because I know that there are some people who, to this day, still hate Elden Beast, and there are some valid criticisms. I think this fight has more going for it than people give it credit for. To begin, Elden Beast is the best creature boss in Elden Ring. His tactics are varied in a satisfying way to engage with. I'll start by breaking down his melee attacks, then his ranged tactics, because he uses both in equal measure. His swings with the Sacred Relic Sword are laborious and delayed, surprisingly with the similar tempo to Radagon's hammer swings. It gives you plenty of time to punish him during his combos and get multiple hits in after his combos. Another thing is the sweeping sword attacks can be jumped, which I'm always a fan of. The Elden Beast has a few magic-based attacks that he will use at close range. He'll attempt to grab you in the coolest grab attack in the entire series if you let it connect. Unfortunately for him, the grab is really slow and easy to dodge with a nice punish. He will close his fist and slam down with a nebula-like AoE, which is fine to dodge, but feels a little too delayed. He also has this vortex-like move where he summons this black hole-looking thing, where he repositions himself and it explodes, giving a fair amount of time to close in and punish him. He also has a stab down with the Sacred Relic Sword where he triggers an AoE, which is easy to dodge and outspace. All the moves that I've mentioned so far are pretty fair, fun, and engaging as a whole. This fight is more peaceful than Radagon, but has a nice, gentle tempo. The attacks that follow are where the Elden Beast fight starts to feel a bit off in terms of pacing. He has various Golden Rain attacks, which are easy enough to dodge by sprinting. He has two variations of Nebula, one where you can close in on him and one where you have to stay away. He has a Dive Bomb attack, which can be punished after a successful dodge when he resurfaces. The Golden Flame Breath attack can be punished if you run to his backside, but this is only if you are at close range when he starts the attack, and this is only generally when the fight starts. He has two attacks which can be punished if at mid-range when they start, but I have two very different reactions to them. Elden Beast's Sacred Blade fires off 4 golden projectiles that are really satisfying to roll while you close the distance on him, and if you're close enough by the 3rd projectile, the last one will shoot right over your head and you get a nice long punish window. Wave of Gold, on the other hand, kind of sucks. If the Elden Beast winds it up and you're at mid-range, you have two options. Sprint as close to his body as possible and try to manage to get a good hit in, or you can try spraying away. If you're at mid-range, when Wave of Gold fires, you will get hit. There is no iframing it with standard rolling, which feels pretty lousy. So, with Elden Beast's ranged tactics, while some of them have punish windows, they are a good way to have the fight feel engaging while you try to close the distance between yourself and Elden Beast, so the fight doesn't feel overly chill. So, where does the pacing really fall apart? It rests in 2 attacks. Both versions of Elden Beast's Elden Rings are triggered at specific health thresholds. The single ring is around 65 to 75% health, and the triple rings around 25 to 40% health. This attack itself is not bad, jumping over the rings as they close in to avoid the massive explosion, acting as a reset moment for both the boss and the player. That's not the issue. The issue is twofold. Elden Beast is definitely regaining most of his stance during this attack, and Elden Beast gets a lot of distance from you, meaning all those ranged attacks I mentioned are fair game for him to use. Depending on what Elden Beast uses, you're going to spend anywhere between 30 seconds to a minute trying to close the distance, while Elden Beast gets to use all of his ranged attacks with impunity. And this is definitely where the accusations of the Elden Beast chronically running away come from, and they're not entirely wrong. Elden Rings is more or less a scripted attack in both cases. You would have to have amazing DPS for these attacks not to occur. The same goes for arguably the second most infamous attack in all of Elden Ring, Elden Stars, the cast where golden sparklers follow you around very aggressively, chipping away at your health, while Elden Beast gets free reign to layer any of his other ranged attacks on top of it. Now, Elden Stars is avoidable if you do a very specific circle around him as he casts it, or if you stance break Elden Beast out of it, but both of those require pretty specific circumstances, and as I've mentioned before, nigh guaranteed damage should never be celebrated in skill-based combat. So, Radabeast as a combined package find themselves in a very similar position to Promised Consort Radahn, from one finale to another, a satisfying and engaging fight that is not without fundamental flaws that can make this fight not feel as fun as it truly should be. The man, the myth, the absolute legend himself of the first Elden Lord. Both Godfrey and Hoarah have a lot going on mechanically and are outstanding. To begin with Godfrey, this is the true version of what was foreshadowed in the mid-game. When at close range, Godfrey mostly sticks with various axe combos of moderate speed, and can be punished either from a neutral stance or from rolling, creating a great consistent ebb and flow. My favorite of his basic combos is his slam into spinning slam, because during the second slam, if you have good positioning, you can sidestep it. There's nothing cleaner than dodging an attack from just sidestepping, plus it gives a great opening to punish Godfrey with a heavy attack or weapon skill. To break up the fight from feeling one note, Godfrey will dash, usually to the side and stomp, splintering the earth beneath his feet in a small AoE. These stomps can be jumped over just like with the Goldfree fight, and as I mentioned there, it creates a very dynamic flair to the fight by being able to jump and punish his maneuvering. The real Godfrey fight has a few mechanics that distinguish him from Goldfree prior to his transformation into Hoarah. About a quarter of the way through the fight, Godfrey has access to his Fissure attack, where he slams his axe into the ground, splitting the earth beneath him and shattering it in a massive earthquake AoE. Let me be clear, there is no logical reason why we should be able to iframe this. It's a lot like Bale's nuke in that sense. If this was meant to be a get off me attack that couldn't be dodged, I would accept that. But the fact that we can safely punish and dodge this attack is amazing. The second mechanic that is unique to Godfrey is his Regal Roar, where he lets out a massive battle cry before slamming his axe into the ground, creating an arena-wide AoE. From this point on, every one of Godfrey's stomps will unleash an arena-wide AoE, which doesn't change up the jump timing of these stomps, but it can be a tad obnoxious if you aren't used to it. The thing is, like the stomps before it, Regal Roar can be jump punished, which always adds an additional layer of depth to the fight. Lastly, Regal Roar is one of the last moves Godfrey will do in his first phase, so the stomp phase shouldn't last very long. And then, Godfrey sheds Siraj from his back and becomes a beast himself. Hoarah's moveset definitely heightens the stakes of this fight. Hoarah is a grappler and a brawler. About a quarter to a half of his moves are grab attacks, which will take out majority of your health if they connect. Fortunately, these grabs are among his most telegraphed attacks, where the only real trick is how delayed they are. Most of his moveset beyond these grabs are swipes with his man hands, punches, and kicks, where you have to carefully pay attention to how his body moves. Surprisingly, the swing speed of some of Hoarah's attacks feel very similar to his axe swings. Another notable attack is where he leaps at you and yanks the ground with Herculean strength. Easily the biggest example of a get away from me attack and acts as a reset of pacing for the fight, which breaks up the relentless pace of the second phase. The final attack he uses as a last-ditch effort to oust our Tarnished is Hoarlu's Earthshaker, where he opens with a regal roar into slamming his palms on the ground twice. This attack provides a massive opening for at least 2 attacks during the roar, 1 rolling attack during the first slam, and another rolling attack or even a charged heavy attack after the second slam, which is really satisfying. This fight is incredibly well made and very fun, but if I had to think of any criticisms, I can think of 2. Depending on how much you've damaged Godfrey's stance, you can make it so that you stance break him as Hoarlu begins. Between that, a critical attack, and 1 or 2 attacks after that, this will likely script Hoarlu into entering his Earthshaker. If he does that, this fight is pretty much finished, so it can suffer from similar pacing issues like Morgott. Like father, like son, am I right? Lastly, while Hoarlu's second phase is relentless and pretty enjoyable, his body movements can feel a little unnatural to read, which to this day can mess up my timing by a bit. Honored guests, it's time for my top 4 bosses based on how fun they are. Each of these bosses are what I consider to be the absolute peak of Elden Ring's combat, after my 2,000 plus hours with the game, and while they may have a blemish or 2, that doesn't stop them from being some of the best fights in not just Elden Ring, but in all of gaming. I'm also going to be honest that any one of these 4 fights could be my favorite in Elden Ring on any given day. My placement is mostly based on how I felt, laying out all of my thoughts and knowledge on paper and reflecting. Starting with Mohg, Lord of Blood, gatekeeper of Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and he lives up to that name in every single way. Mechanically, Mohg does everything to prepare the player for the demands of the DLC. Mohg's Great Spear combos are intimidating, but have windows just big enough for rolling attacks during his combos, with his finishers giving sizable windows to punish him. The delays do take some time to get used to though, but once you get the flow, it's just like riding a bike. He has quick jabs to mix up the timing, which also give a window to punish Mohg. He has 2 variants of his Blood Flame talents, both of which are engaging to deal with. The most common one is when Mohg uses Blood Flame talents from neutral and directly in front of him, followed up by a stab. The other version is where Mohg sidesteps into it and follows up with a sweep. After dodging the explosion, not for the blood trail, and dodging the melee attack, you get a decent opening. Mohg's melee attacks are really satisfying because there are so many openings in his combos. Mohg has 3 versions of Blood Boon, which he will use if the player is at mid-range, and all leave Blood Flame on the ground for a while after their cast. We'll get into their impact on the fight in the second phase when it's more of a factor, but for now, let's just talk about the engagement value. The vertical and horizontal spreads of Blood Boon are both engaging enough as they encourage the player to close the distance on Mohg and be mindful of their dodge positioning. Position and dodge to the sides on the vertical spread. Dodge the horizontal spread by going forward. There is one version of Blood Boon I'm generally not a fan of, which is the shower version, when Mohg tears into the Formless Mother above him. It is a general get off of me attack, which I have spoken of before, but meant to break up the pacing of the fight and serve as a reset for both the player and the boss. I'd be more okay with this attack if there was one mechanic of Mohg's fight that I haven't brought up yet, the knee heal counter. Throughout certain health thresholds, Mohg will ominously count down from 3 to 1 in Latin, placing a knee heal ring around the player. Of course, we all know what happens when he reaches 0. But the countdown itself is interesting enough to talk about. Mohg's countdown takes priority over all other moves he can do in his first phase. While he counts, you get a free opening on Mohg. This means if your DPS is good enough, fighting Mohg can turn into turn-based combat, where he essentially doesn't get a turn, because by the time he finishes one count, you've reached the next count threshold, which is why builds with the best DPS potential are capable of prematurely ending the fight before Moog can use Nihil and enter his second phase, which is amazing that that's even possible. Now, this is where I have an issue with Bloodboon Shower. If Moog does this attack and then does a Nihil count, your opening that you would have is completely robbed from you. You could argue that this is intentional design, to prevent the player from being able to DPS Moog before his second phase. But if that's the case, Moog would always create this situation, which he just doesn't. Moog's count is meant to build up towards Nihil, while also breaking up the fight's pacing and giving the player with an opening. Bloodboon Shower has the potential of disrupting that, but that's a minor complaint. Upon completing Moog's countdown, he activates Nihil, which is guaranteed damage. And while I won't necessarily applaud this, I will say at least the game doesn't try to make you believe that this attack is avoidable. The Purifying Crystal tier exists specifically for this purpose. So, while guaranteed damage does suck, at least the game knows it. Nihil is frankly the least interesting part of Moog's fight, since he just regenerates his health and then the second phase begins. That being said, the second phase is an excellent extension of the first phase moveset. The addition of his wings adds great variety as he can lift into the air, rain down Bloodboon, and combo it into a melee attack. He gets new twisting variants of his stab attacks, and his downward pierce attack now ends in a blood flame explosion. Additionally, all of Moog's attacks spew blood flame around the arena. I love this addition. I'm not trolling, not even trying to have a hot take or rage bait. Moog's blood flame mechanics, his entire second phase moveset, is meant to inform the player that the safest way to fight Moog is sticking to him like glue and fighting him as aggressively as possible. The fight punishes passivity by letting Moog deny you movement, but the point is if you're right next to Moog and fighting him aggressively, the blood flame becomes a total non-issue. I'm not saying it can't be a problem with certain scenarios, namely if he uses Bloodboon Shower in the second phase, which is still my least favorite attack in Moog's fight, but I love a mechanic that encourages aggression in a clever way. Mesmer the Impaler lived up to all the hype of being the poster boy of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. This fight is an absolute masterclass in boss fight pacing. Mesmer is aggressive, but not so overbearing that you feel like you have no room to breathe. He has a very demanding moveset, but never feels like he dominates the flow of battle without you having a say in that flow. This is arguably the most balanced fight in all of Elden Ring in terms of how it's constructed. Now to unpack how it is achieved. Mesmer opens the fight with his orb, an explosively cinematic attack with two hitboxes, one on impact and one with the explosion. What's neat is mechanically there's at least one opening during the orb. Two, if you jump the initial impact and attack him. The aforementioned jump attack needs to be done with a fast weapon, otherwise you will be caught up in the explosion. As for his first phase moveset, Mesmer has it all. Fast combos, slight delayed combos, combos where he incorporates Mesmer fire incantations with stabs and thrusts. Similar to Rolana, the key to unlocking the fun with Mesmer is understanding the beginning and end of his combos for your openings. His combo finisher, where he spins with flames, is generally a safe punish. Same for when he drags his spear on the ground and thrusts. Honestly, the tempo of Mesmer's first phase attacks are moderate as a whole and give nice openings for those who familiarize themselves with his patterns. I think the only attacks that I'm not a huge fan of are his quick double swipe, which he usually does to get distance, because it is a single roll catch, but can be handled well enough with a double dodge, and his vaulting move where he does his best impression of a Beyblade. It's mostly a skill issue for me, but it definitely is a lot. What's wild is Mesmer's most iconic move from his first phase is frankly easier and way more satisfying to dodge, Mesmer's Assault. This attack is pretty much if Waterfowl Dance was intuitively designed. Each part of this attack feels intuitive and natural to dodge. it feels fun and thrilling with a very fair punish afterward. What's also pretty neat is you can stance break Mesmer out of doing Mesmer's assault entirely, which is really satisfying to pull off. Hell, if we could parry Waterfowl Dance as it started or knock Melania out of it, that would have made that attack so much more engaging, but this isn't about her. In short, Mesmer's first phase is an excellent boss in mechanics and attacks, with a few attacks that can be a little bit obnoxious but otherwise inoffensive. Like so many before, Mesmer's second phase is where the intensity increases, yet this is where I'd say this fight reaches its true peak. The second phase brings the introduction to Mesmer's true form, the base serpent. After opening with a serpentine version of Mesmer's orb, which is functionally more or less the same as the first phase, Mesmer's second phase brings Mesmer's serpent attacks, where he either becomes the base serpent, or summons massive serpents to attack you from a distance. These attacks are incredibly intimidating, cinematic, and just truly awesome, and very satisfying to dodge as the serpent's fangs slam into the ground next to you. The thing that makes these attacks really mechanically satisfying is for these attacks where Mesmer transforms into the base serpent, he is vulnerable to damage while he transitions back into his humanoid form. This gives the fight an excellent dichotomy of high risk, high reward. Mesmer's serpent attacks do a lot of damage, but with timely dodges, they give the largest openings. From a melee perspective, Mesmer does get one noteworthy attack, where most of his attack chains end in a serpentine corkscrew, a refreshing way to change up familiar attacks, plus this attack can be comfortably rolled or jumped. The final attack, where Mesmer loses all control of the base serpent, is an attack that I both love and loathe to varying degrees. The shadows blast forth from Mesmer's body, where serpents encircle him, dart forward in an attempt to devour the tarnished before Mesmer recomposes himself and ends the combo with the Mesmer Assault slam into spears. I love this attack. Mostly. It's really satisfying to dodge and visually stunning. I do think the initial AoE from the shadows is a bit big, and it kind of annoys me that it does chip damage even before the initial explosion. If you're point blank when this attack begins, it can be similar to Ramna's phase transition, where aggression is squarely punished. But in general, Mesmer is a masterful fight, with only a few somewhat annoying attacks, where the only other fault that I can think of, and this is a complaint that we've heard before, is on replays a competent player with a solid build is not likely to need to master this fight to its fullest extent. His health isn't that big, he is pretty vulnerable to statuses, and his stance isn't very strong. Mesmer is kind of like eating a satisfying meal and wishing that the last bite wasn't the end. I'm sure all of you remember at launch when Malekith was the bane of everyone's existence, and it was a hot take to enjoy this fight. Some, to this day, still don't appreciate Malekith, but this fight, nearly every detail of it, is peak Elden Ring, and I'm going to try my best to convey it. We'll start with the weaker half of this fight, which frankly still isn't a bad fight, and introduces a lot of the core mechanics and tempo of the boss in general. The Beast Clergyman phase, Gurranq, introduces every mechanic you'll need to know about his true form. He has unrelenting melee attacks, which either take the form of a combo, quick swipes, a retreating slash, and a long sweep with an exaggerated tell. What is so engaging about all of Gurranq's melee attacks is they reward intentional design positioning and spacing with the boss. The best part is Gurranq can be lovingly manipulated into his combo, where he ends with a slamming stab downward based on how you dodge, which nets you with a massive opening where almost any attack in Elden Ring can be safely landed. This is something that I've mentioned with a lot of bosses in Elden Ring before, where the best Elden Ring bosses emphasize the importance of positioning, being intentional with where you are in the arena, and not necessarily spamming rolling, and Malekith as a whole is a prime example of that. Gurranq also makes use of various ranged attacks. His bestial incantations take many forms, in Beast Claw and Gurranq's Beast Claw, both of which can be jump punished, which we will always encourage attacks that are more engaging than just rolling. He has Stone of Gurranq, which can be rolled, or with a timely sprint during the windup can go right over your head for a safe punish. The only attacks in this phase that are kind of mechanically plain and not very fun are Bestial Sling and Gurranq's Ground Eruption. Bestial Sling is fine and can have a punish if you roll into it, but he mostly saves this attack for when you're at mid-range, so it's mostly just space between more engaging attacks. Gurranq's Ground Eruption, to this day, kinda makes me a little mad, yet satisfying depending on how it plays out. Starting with the attack itself, Gurranq plants his hands on the ground before lifting boulders from the ground, which have a hitbox when they come up and when they come down. The attack itself is fine, since you do get a fair punish in before he does it. What's annoying is what comes after. There is so much visual noise when the boulders come up that Gurranq usually is throwing another attack to layer over it, which can create some pretty hairy situations, especially if he uses Bestial Sling. But this situation only happens if you're being too aggressive at the wrong time. Really, I imagine that the devs meant this to be a back-off attack, as most sane players would do that. I have 2,000 hours in Elden Ring. I'm not that. In short, the Beast Clergyman phase is really mechanically interesting, and so much more fun than I feel most people are willing to give it credit for. But it's time for the main events. Malekith, the Black Blade. The second phase of Malekith's boss fight, when he becomes his true form, is absolute perfection incarnate. Every single one of Malekith's attacks can be consistently dodged and punished. He usually opens with this front flip slash, which can either be dodged forward, or you can position yourself so that he jumps right over you for a solid opening. The bulk of his melee combos are usually one or two heavy swings at a time, where you get a nice opening to hit him at combo's end. What I especially love is this overhead chop, because this can just be strafed, which feels so clean, giving another opening. As for the next attacks I'm going to bring up, this is where a fair amount of complaints about Malekith come into play. The first is Destined Death. Oh my god, the amount of people who call foul on this one attack. Oh, the anime slashes of death! Well, let's look at the anatomy of it. He usually does it after a 2-slash combo and has an initial swipe on the windup, which can hit stun, and if it does, you're getting annihilated with a ton of holy damage and the Destined Death damage over time effect, which is probably ending you. So why does it feel so good to dodge? By dodging the initial slash, you can start sprinting with urgency to your right and roll at the last second, evading the Destined Death blades entirely and getting rewarded with a generous opening. It is so good! The next attacks I'm going to lump into the category of attacks people don't like because Malekith is flying around the arena playing Devil May Cry, which I'm going to establish these are also peak. First, his pillar attacks, where Malekith leaps onto the pillar and will do one of two attacks. He will either jump down with a stab, followed with an erupting AoE. This is ideal because after rolling the AoE, you can get in a retaliation, or even better, if you have the Blasphemous Claw, this stab can be parried. The other possibility is Malekith leaping away launching a black blade that will deal destined death if it connects. This feels fine to dodge, and while Malekith is disengaging and doesn't give you an opening, it's a nice reset of positioning. While the camera can jerk up a little bit when he's jumping onto the pillar, this isn't all that bad really to call camera shenanigans. The last attacks worth mentioning are Malekith's Black Blade combos, where he uses Black Blade multiple times, ending with either a plunge attack or a spinning slash, depending on your proximity to Malekith. Honestly, this is just a ton of fun to bob and weave and dodge these combos. The plunge grants an opening, whereas the spinning slash is pure cinema to dodge, both of which can be parried with the Blasphemous Claw. Malekith's moveset is pretty close to perfect, in my opinion. The fight pacing is so good, the perfect ebb and flow between player and boss. This fight is incredibly consistent and an absolute joy to fight with each playthrough, and just gets better the more you master it. So, are there any flaws? Beyond a few annoying attacks here and there, the only real thing is this fight can suffer from some pacing issues due to two factors. Malekith has a very low stance and very low health for where he's positioned in the game. Because of this, once someone has mastered this fight, Malekith can be bullied pretty hard. But in truth, can we really count that as a flaw when the truth is that happens with any fight? Mastery leads to being able to execute better. At any rate, Malekith is pure excellence strictly for how engaging his moveset is and how consistent of a boss he is. Like with promised consort Radahn, I'm sure there were plenty who scrolled through this video strictly to see where I put Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and will judge the quality of this video strictly on this placement. Well, here she is. Now go watch the rest of the video. For everyone else who's made it this far, thank you. So yeah, Malenia is among the best fights in Elden Ring, and is an absolute awesome fight that only gets richer with greater mastery and has some of the most mechanical depth out of the entire boss roster. Understanding Malenia's first phase attacks is to understand all the things that set her apart from other bosses. Unlike most of the main bosses in Elden Ring, where once they start throwing an attack, they are doing it and there is no stopping it unless you get a stance break, Malenia can be staggered out of some of her attack animations, similar to Lady Maria and Sister Frida before her. Similarly, Malenia also has attacks where she has hyper armor and cannot be stance broken. Knowing when she does and doesn't have hyper armor can unlock a world of depth of just how aggressive you can be in this deadly dance of a fight. During her first phase, she can be interrupted during her basic sword swings, her triple flurry attack, her grab attack, and her spinning kicks. Interrupting Malenia's attacks is really satisfying because it makes it so that you're the one who's using your offense to play defense and setting the fight at your tempo. You can also get into a very nice rhythm of her attacking you, and you using spacing, some dodging, and good timing to interrupt her. For her attacks where she has hyper armor, there is the two sword swing attack where she locks her hand into her arm and swings up once before gracefully swinging down, her retreating double slash, her sidestep into spinning slash down, and her jumping impaling thrust. All of these attacks, with exception of her retreating slash, have pretty dramatic tells and are really satisfying to dodge and counter with your own attack after her hyper armor is inactive. What adds an additional layer of depth to Malenia is a solid chunk of her moveset can be parried, which is really satisfying to learn. And these are all totally everything that's worth mentioning in Malenia's first phase. There's nothing else to address, right? Right? Oh, you want me to talk about Malenia's waterfowl dance. and likely her lifesteal mechanic too. Okay, I'll play ball. I'll unpack the lifesteal first. It's a pretty unforgiving mechanic when trying to learn Malenia, and I'll admit it's pretty soul-crushing to watch Malenia undo the progress you've made against her in the flash of a sword. But I will raise something of a counterpoint. Malenia hits really hard. She is literally the highest scaled enemy in the entirety of Elden Ring's base game. You really shouldn't be getting hit by her very much at all. Not if you want to win. So, as you start to master Malenia's kit, the lifesteal becomes more and more of a non-issue over time. As for Waterfowl Dance, now, I'll be honest, I know this attack all too well. It is easily the one attack that has failed me the most against Malenia, likely more than any other single attack in the entirety of Elden Ring. I can dodge it point blank. If at mid-range, it's definitely way more manageable to run backward and outspace part of it and dodge the rest of it normally. The community knows about using Frost and Bleed procs to break her out of it. Bloodhound's Step is still viable to dodge it. But to be real, this attack is so much. I doubt the devs who created Waterfowl Dance knew how to dodge it when they made it. It is by far the hardest attack in all of Elden Ring to dodge, with very few attacks coming anywhere close to how demanding it can be. I can see why this attack spoils the fight for Malenia for some, and it does put fight pacing at a bit of an impasse. Without Waterfowl Dance, this fight is a balanced ebb and flow between you and Malenia. With Waterfowl Dance, its mere existence is a constant distraction, because once you get her around 70% health or lower, it is an inevitability, and it makes the player second guess how much they can commit to aggression. It leaves an imminent aura of suspense that you're never truly safe against Malenia. And maybe I'm a masochist for almost relishing in that suspense, and I won't deny it. I love nailing a perfect, point-blank waterfowl dodge. It is the sweetest thing in this entire game. Onward to Malenia's second phase, where the mechanics by and large are generally the same, with some attacks having hyper armor while some don't, with the addition of a few new attacks, starting with Scarlet Aeonia. This attack is pretty neat to me. Circling around Malenia seems to throw off its tracking big time, allowing the player to get plenty of distance to avoid the Scarlet Rot explosion. This attack is nice, because it's almost like a calm before the storm. The passive nature of Malenia's first phase is a far cry from the relentless pace of the second, so it is a nice reprieve before the real battle begins. It gives a chance to cool the nerves, heal, reapply buffs, or for builds with ranged options, you can cash in on a big opening, albeit with Malenia taking slightly reduced damage. The thing with Malenia's second phase is while her moves are mostly unchanged, it is mainly her AI's behavior that is changed. Gone are the moments of Malenia menacingly stalking towards you, waiting for you to make the first move. Rather, she is taken to aggression. One major difference in her attack patterns is a fair amount of her combos are likely to end with her rising up with her butterfly wings and striking down with an explosion of Scarlet Rot. This attack seems scary at first. After all, Scarlet Rot is arguably one of the most intimidating status effects in the entire game. But if you dodge to position yourself behind Malenia, you will avoid the Rot explosion entirely, and because she stays in place for a while, you'll have a free opening. It should be noted, there is another dynamic change in Malenia's behavior. Like in her first phase, where if you land a few successive hits, Malenia will react by retreating. Unlike the first phase, she won't backpedal. Rather, she will retaliate against you with a spinning kick. This is meant to be a tactic to get you off of her, but if you know it's coming either by counting hits or just having great reaction time, you can punish that kick attack as well. It's a really satisfying game of going back and forth, almost like a tug of war between the player and Malenia on whose aggression is stronger. The last attack of note in Malenia's second phase is her rock clones, which I won't lie, if you're mid-range and stay put, this attack is more or less a more honest version of Waterfowl Dance in terms of how demanding it can be to dodge. But since it has a generous tail, if you start sprinting as soon as she starts it up, you will only need to dodge one clone and then her directly, and then you get a safe punish. As a whole, Malenia's boss fight is incredibly rich, complex, and a rigorous test of a player's skill in Elden Ring's combat, and I truly believe it is the pinnacle of Elden Ring's boss fights. And that's my complete ranking. I hope you all enjoyed my ranting, raving, and analysis of Elden Ring's bosses. Feel free to comment your own opinions on Elden Ring's bosses, what you agree with, what you disagree with, it's all fair play. And I'll see you all next time.